So it's 5 o'clock. I think we'll get started. I'd like to welcome all the participants tonight who have joined us. And we're here to take question and answers about our draft consolidated plan documents, which are currently on display for public review. My name is Doreen Kirkmeyer, and I'm the manager of planning for the city. I have a few colleagues here with me who I'll introduce in a minute. First, I want to introduce you to Elizabeth Murphy. Elizabeth, a senior community Elizabeth is a senior community planner on my team and the project manager for this project. She will be facilitating this Zoom session with the help of Andre Primus from Highland Planning. Andre, along with Tanya Zwalin, who is the principal at Highland Planning, have been helping us with the public engagement for this project. We want this hour to focus on you and the questions that you have about the consolidated plan or the 4 draft consolidated plan documents that are on public review. So we're not going to spend time going through a presentation right now. If you're interested in a presentation, there is a video recording of an overview presentation on our project webpage that you can watch whenever you like. You can find that at www.cityofrochester.gov/consolidated plan 2020 to 2024. You can also find all 4 draft documents on the webpage if you haven't already had a chance to review them. As a reminder, those documents are the 2020 to 2024 Consolidated Plan, the 2020 to 2021 Annual Action Plan, the Citizen Participation Plan, and the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice. And now, before we turn it over to you to start asking questions, I'd like to introduce the team that we have on the call. And when I say your name, team, please wave so people who know who you are. First, from Mullen & Lonergan, a consulting firm based out of Pittsburgh, we have Marjorie Willow and Christine Durunk. And from the city, in addition to Elizabeth and myself, we have Carol Wheeler, Manager of Housing, Thaddeus Schofield, Director of Strategic Business Development, Mary Kay Kenrick, Principal Staff Assistant with the Department of Neighborhood and Business Development, Christina Heiligenthaler, Principal Staff Assistant with the Department of Recreation and Youth Services, and Phillis Oliver, Principal Staff Assistant with the Department of Environmental Services. As I mentioned before, Andre and Elizabeth will be facilitating the session. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to them. And thanks again for joining us tonight.
Great, thanks, Doreen. So I'm going to turn this over to Andre in a minute. He is facilitating on the back end with the Zoom. So we'll be telling you a little bit about how you all can participate and ask your questions. And depending on what the question is, I'll either do my best to answer it myself, or we may be teeing it off to one of our colleagues here who are the subject matter experts on a lot of the projects included in our annual action plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andre.
Hi, everyone. I just want you to know that we have a couple different features here in Zoom. Everyone should be able to see the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you can't see it, you may need to mouse over the Zoom window where you see the person who's talking. If it's working correctly, you should be seeing my face right now. And so if you zoom over that, or if you mouse over that, you should see some buttons on the bottom. If you click on Q&A, you can use that to type questions in, and we will be passing those to the appropriate person over this hour. If you are on a phone and you need to ask a question, I have the ability to allow you to talk, and you can ask the question that way. If you need to have a more nuanced discussion than just asking a question, there is a chat feature. So feel free to get into that chat feature and kind of talk about, you know, oh, I have a question that we need a little more explanation. But we want to have as much of it through the audio and through the video as we can, so we can include people who are on their phone, things like that. If you have any questions about how everything works, let me know. You can chat me privately as well. If you go into the attendees or go into the chat field, you can select who you're chatting to. And so you can chat at the panelists or you can chat at me, and just let me know if you have a question. I can help you out. All right, thank you so much.
So does somebody have a question?
Anybody have any questions about how to access the website or anything like that?
I just want to note also, I think Elizabeth and Doreen did mention this. There is a video on the website that explains the presentation, and all the draft documents are there as well if you need to reference them.
Correct.
Disappear for a second and grab you those links. But looks like we have a question from Jen Vitamin. And she's asking, in the draft plan, it mentions using CDBG funds for public facilities such as parks, complete streets, etc. Could you talk a little bit more about that goal? And this is a question for Elizabeth Murphy.
I don't know that I have much more to say. I think as you referenced in the consolidated plan, which is kind of the high level overarching document, it covers our next 5 program years. A pretty key section of that document to pay attention to is the strategic plan. And in that area of the consolidated plan, it identifies priority needs and goals. And the need for public facilities and infrastructure is identified there in the strategic plan. And there's some language that explains what is meant by public infrastructure and public facilities. So I'd recommend that you go to that. Anything that's listed there under, and I could draw it up and read it out loud if there aren't other questions, but that's basically what we're referring to when we talk about public facilities or infrastructure. And what that means is that going forward, when in the annual action plan, which is something that we do each year, we have to identify how any proposed project that we want to include in the annual action plan fits with our description and definition of public facilities and infrastructure there in the con-plan strategic plan.
Did that answer the question?
Jen says that's helpful, so that's good.
Okay, so I'm going to look and see what page you could reference to see the full definition of that in the consolidated plan.
Also, just to remind people that you can ask questions also on the website. We collect all the questions each Friday and then post the answers on Wednesday. We did receive many questions last week, so we've been working on answering those, and that all those answers will be posted by this Wednesday. Elizabeth, is it close of business Wednesday, or what's the day? What's the time on the posting the answers on Wednesday?
Yes. Yep. By the end of the day on Wednesday, we post answers. So just in follow-up to Jen's question, if you look in the consolidated plan on page 128, that's where you see listed the priority need for public infrastructure and facilities. And on the following page is a description of what all, it's kind of long, there's a lot of wording here. That's where we've defined what we mean by that. Would Christina or Phyllis like to add anything on that front? Because it's typically DRIS and DES that are bringing forth projects in the annual action plan under those needs and goals.
Sure. I can speak from DRIS, and Phyllis is very well involved with our projects as well, but the Department of Recreation and Youth Services doesn't tend to use our annual allocation in that amount to update features, including playgrounds and spray park, spray features in at least one, hopefully two playgrounds in the next year, in the 2021 timeframe.
So when it comes to the other infrastructure projects, previously we have done facility work at concession stands. We did the Genesee Valley Park Playground concession stand. And we do a residential rehabilitation of roads. So that helps us stretch the dollars that we're spending on our road work so that we can get more of the residential roads done. Our residential roads don't tend to get maintained as well as some of our county roads or our federally funded roads. So some of us in the little residential areas get onto some pretty bad sections of road, and it helps keep it so that we're a little happier heading off to work every day.
Any other questions?
I just want to note, since we had a couple new attendees, if you do want to ask questions, we have the Q&A feature open. So you can mouse over the screen that shows the image of the person talking and click on the Q&A button at the bottom, and that should let you ask any questions you like. Note from Bruce saying he's just here to listen today. No questions, so that's great. Thanks.
Bruce, we did receive some questions from you online that we are working on. So you'll see responses to your questions posted on Wednesday.
On Wednesday.
We have a question from Mike Bolter asking, can you explain more about how high priority needs are used to guide future plans / funding? For instance, food access is listed as a high priority need, and food nutrition appears in several areas of the document. Elizabeth, who do you think would be best to comment on that?
Well, I can take a crack at it, and then Mary Kay, perhaps if you have anything additional that you'd want to add, you could jump in. But the key area to pay attention to, as I mentioned before, is in the consolidated plan. It's called the strategic plan, and I think it begins on page 124. So there are places where we may summarize earlier in the document needs that we heard about from community input or needs identified through different types of market analysis or economic development analysis. But the strategic plan is a really important section of the consolidated plan, because every single project that we want to include in an annual action plan has to be justified by tying it to the language in a priority need identified here. And so that section, it's at the strategic plan priority needs, begins on page 126 of the consolidated plan. So the strategic plan is going to have more things that it identifies as a potential priority need, then we may have funding in any given year to include as a project. But it needs to be inclusive of anything that we may want to or think could be justified to receive funding in the next 5 years. So I'm not remembering off the top of my head if I think we did include food in the strategic plan somewhere. So you would want to see that identified in the strategic plan in order for a project this year or in future years to be able to be included and receive funding. Mary Kay, or maybe even Christine, because Christine DeRunk with Mullen and Lonergan did a lot of the analysis and content development for the.
Yep, the only thing I was going to add was there are plenty of needs and there's not always enough money to cover all of those needs. So that's part of the balancing act.
Yep. You're always going to see more needs and eligible activities under each of those needs in the strategic plan than you're going to see in any individual annual action plan identified, because we need everything that we may want to be able to do in the next 5 years has to be tied to a priority need that was identified in the strategic plan.
Thanks.
Christine, did you have something to add?
No, Elizabeth, I think you did a great job explaining how the strategic plan really outlines the high-level needs and priorities over the next 5 years. I guess if I just want to add one small thing to it, just to really drive the point home. So if, for example, food access was not listed in the strategic plan as being an identified need, and next year the city recognizes that food access is a huge critical need, and it really could be given what is happening with the pandemic. But if nowhere in the document it said food access was a need, then the city would need to go through a process to amend their plan and get it basically approved by HUD again, so that the city would be able to spend money to provide funds to service providers that do increase access to food. So the strategic plan tends to be a pretty broad description of the needs that are identified. And as Mary Kay said, there are always way more needs than there is money. So the city made a good decision, I think, to be as broad as possible and to identify all the needs and to recognize that those are needs, to allow flexibility over the next 5 years to meet the needs of residents as needs shift and change, and particularly now, because we don't know what's going to be happening 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and certainly not 3 years from now.
Mm-hmm. And so just as we were answering this question, I did look, and I see that food access is listed under the priority need that is to provide public services. So going forward, I mean, you could certainly, as a comment for this consolidated plan or annual action plan, you could, submit a comment, supporting that need, or, bringing an idea for a project that would be related to that. But one thing to be aware of is that, and Mary Kay, maybe I'll ask you to speak a little bit more about this, but public services, there's a wide, diverse range of projects that we fund that come under the category of public services. They're subject to a cap in the HUD regulations. So in any given year, we can only spend, is it up to 15%, Mary Kay?
That's correct.
Only 15% of our funds can be spent on public services. So those are highly coveted dollars, because there are a lot of needs that fall into the category as HUD classifies projects of public services.
Thanks. So we have another question, 2 questions I think that are related, from Mary Coffey, asking a breakdown by zip code is too general. Can you give exactly who got money, how much, and for what? And related to that, some neighborhoods have been told their incomes are too high to receive any money. So Elizabeth, do you want to talk about some of those eligibility issues? Or I assume that the breakdown, to get any more specific, we couldn't answer right now. That'd be.
Yeah, so the way that we measure and monitor and track projects and funding amounts is set in HUD regulations, and they have a process called the Consolidated Annual performance evaluation and report. Is that what it's called, Mary Kay? The CAPER is the acronym. We always call it the CAPER.
Yep.
But each year that's an annual process where we have to go in and we report to HUD what all we spent our money on and how much. And there's actually even addresses in there. So all of the past CAPERs, at least back the last 10 years, I think, are on the city's website. We can share the link in follow-up. Would I email that to you, Andre? But if you go to the website, you can find it. You have to scroll down to the bottom and it's called evaluation reports. And you click on it, it's called the CAPER. So that's gonna show you where and how we spent our money and on what in a lot of detail. The other question was about eligibility. And again, maybe Mary Kay, you can jump in on this, but yes, HUD restricts where and who we can serve with HUD funds. So we have to spend all of our money in areas that are determined to be eligible, which would be low mod areas where most people have what HUD defines as a low or moderate income, which is 80% of the area median income or less, or to serve households and individuals, businesses, or jobs that are low mod individuals, households, or jobs. Mary Kay, is there anything more you would say on that, or to clarify?
They would have to be at least the 80% or below. It has to be at least 51% of the people that live in the census tract. So we would have to look at each census tract to see if it meets eligibility. And then what is the service area? You know, it kind of depends on what the activity is. I think that DRICE might, or DES might draw a circle around the service area. But yes, the census tracts each have to be income eligible.
And there is on our project webpage, if you scroll down to the very bottom, again, I'll share the link with Andre. There is a link to a map where we've mapped all of the areas that are eligible as areas to receive funding.
So I just want to note, I posted the link to cityrochester.gov/conplan in the chat, and at the if you scroll down that, you can see all the evaluation reports going back to, it looks like 2009. Elizabeth, can you mention again where they can find that map?
Yeah,
So
I just sent you a link.
I was going to just say that that's there's another link that you should post, Andre. That would, yeah. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Are you
So no, it's a little bit confusing. So for this project, we're doing a new 5-year consolidated plan and annual action plans from 2020 through our 2024 program year. The old sort of archived consolidated planning website is where you're going to find all of the CAPERs, and Andre did send the correct app. So use that you scroll down to the bottom and you'll find the CAPERs. And then I think what he just posted, should be a map of all of the low mod areas in the city.
So we have another question. Jen Bideman is asking, can you please share how the plan addresses COVID-19? We have serious concerns over the long-term impact this crisis will have on folks' social determinants and housing in the future.
So we do, I guess there are a couple of things related to that. We did in the strategic plan of the consolidated plan, we did add a priority need that we're using as sort of an umbrella need, which is to respond to, I'm looking for how we phrased it, to respond to emergencies or public health disasters. And so that's sort of an ongoing cross-cutting need. And there's a description there, but we could use that to justify new projects going forward that may not fit within our sort of traditional priority needs and project lists if we found that there was something that we thought could help with recovery to the pandemic or future outbreaks to justify that type of spending. But there's also a whole separate process that's been in play. Earlier this spring, Congress passed the CARES Act. I'm not going to remember what the acronym stands for, but through that, we got a pretty significant new infusion of HUD dollars that are meant and targeted towards this COVID response and recovery. And Mary Kay has been involved in bringing that plan for how we would spend those funds through the council approval process. And I think they've been recently approved. And so they're now getting to work on spending those funds. There's sort of a technicality with HUD. This project that we're talking about here today it's a new consolidated plan that will begin on July 1st of this year, if it is approved by City Council and then sent off to HUD. We wanted to be able to use the CARES Act funds as soon as possible, and so we can't address those through this project. They had to be addressed through an amendment to last year, or the current annual action plan that we're working on from July 1 of last year through June 30th of this year. And so they're dealt with in a slightly different process.
And so those were just approved by City Council last week at our May Council meeting. It was about $4.8 million of CDBG money, 2.4 million for emergency solutions, and 140,000-ish for housing opportunities for persons with AIDS.
Jen said, thanks. We had a question from Bruce asking about that map. If you go into the chat box and you click on the link that has download asset in it, it's long, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but it's cityrochester.gov, and it says work area, download asset, and then it has the ID number for that. If you click on it, it will download that onto your device or computer or whatever you're using, and then you can look at the map. It's a PDF document.
Correct.
And that's the map that shows which block groups in the city of Rochester are considered lower moderate income by HUD. We have another question from Mary Coffey, asking if we can give some examples of economic development jobs specifically achieved with money. I'm not sure if she's to in the plan looking forward, or if she's looking at past plans.
So there's one major project in this year's annual action plan, the business development assistance program. I don't know if I got the name right. Thad Schofield is on the Zoom here with us, who's our Director of Strategic Business Development. Thad, could you maybe talk a little bit about the kinds of projects that you are able to support in jobs that you support through that program?
Sure. So we have our past is exactly the Business Development Financial Assistance Program. We provide loans and grants to businesses looking to grow and succeed, and we have a large job retention amount. Mary, I'm also for right now with the COVID-19 crisis, we put together an emergency grant, and to date we have nearly 300 applications in the last 6 weeks. And the jobs retained for this time period has been over 1,100. So we've acted very quickly. We've made a positive impact upon a lot of companies right now, using this grant to pay those bills where they don't have any revenue coming in. So we're very happy about that we made a positive impact. And we're continuing to move forward with this program and help as many businesses as we can. But right now, with that program specifically, and I'm assuming your question was for during this crisis, over 1,100 jobs have been retained as a result from the applications, 296.
Thanks, Thad.
Great, thanks.
Looks like Dorian is raising his hand. I'm going to allow him to talk, to ask his question verbally. Hi, Dorian. Can you hear me? Oh, give me a second. Let me unmute him.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
There we go. Yep.
So I just heard a little information about the business program. One of the things that I'm interested in seeing is just the data analysis after the fact. The information of, he said 300 people submitted applications. out of those 300 people who received, support. I just kind of want to see if the funding hits some of the neighborhoods or businesses in the neighborhoods. So that's kind of, I thought, is this data going to be open to the public?
I mean, we're definitely doing we probably will do an analysis of where the funding goes to. Right now, every quadrant has been assisted with this program. So I don't have a breakdown right now, but that's something that we probably could consider in the future.
And maybe just a little follow-up. I'm not sure, Doreen, if you were on the line a little earlier when we were talking about eligibility, but there are some eligibility criteria that in order for a business to receive assistance, it needs to, is this correct, that it would need to either be in a low mod area or be preserving or creating low moderate income jobs?
Yes, the funding that we have, Dorian, is the CDBG funding is for low to moderate income areas primarily. So most of the assistance from our CDBG funding will be in low to moderate income areas in those communities that need the greatest amount of assistance. So, and I think my best estimate would be that the majority of the funding from this program has also been in those low to moderate income areas. So it's very well represented, definitely.
Thanks.
Can I respond? Yeah. Can you hear me or no?
Yep.
Hello? Yep.
Yep, we can
Yeah,
hear you.
because I was okay. Yeah, because I was just wondering, because I know of businesses in the Jefferson Avenue area and a few other places, and I've heard of some businesses already receiving funds, and so that was my concern, is that we're missing out some of these businesses that are that I know of in the neighborhood that kind of like heard about the program but are looking for support. But that's the main reason why I wanted to see the data analysis, to see who received the funds.
Okay. I mean, we've hit every quadrant so far, and we've assisted, as I mentioned, over 300 now. We're in process of assisting 300. So I mean, it's something that we don't have right now to share, but it's something we can always consider in the future.
Another question?
Are you guys answering the questions that we submitted, or this is just more of a general discussion where we can ask questions?
Yeah, so we covered this a little bit earlier, Dorian. The questions that we received through the survey form online, we're working on answers to those, and we'll be posting those on the project webpage on Wednesday. So we did receive a few questions from you, and we're working on answers to those, and we'll be writing them up.
Thanks, Dorian. All right, do we have any other people who have questions they want to submit through the Q&A, or who, as Dorian noted, there is a raise hand button, so you can click that as well. If you are more comfortable speaking, or if you have trouble typing, so let us know. Looks like we have a question from Mary Coffey asking if there will say, she says, due to some of the misuse of funds in the past, will there be strong oversight? So I think she's asking if there will be any, what the oversight will be over the use of these next round of funds.
I can provide a little bit of information, and maybe Mary Kay, or if anyone else has information they'd like to share. So the Consolidated Plan and Annual Action Plan oversees just how we use the funding that we receive from HUD, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. And they have pretty strict standards and regulations around how and where and who and why we're able to use those funds in our projects. So there's a lot of documentation actually that goes into all of our different projects to ensure that the way that we spend money is consistent with those HUD regulations. And we actually are also, I mean, we submit our plans and evaluation reports to HUD for their review and input. And we are also subject to HUD monitoring and HUD audits, which happen, I don't know if it's on a regular time basis or, but I know, you know, we even in my time with the city, about 5 years, we've had auditors on site and, you know, bring a lot of information into a room for a few days that they review and monitor. So there is a lot of attention to that, to detail around appropriate and proper use of our funds.
Yes.
And again,
And,
I'm not sure if you were on the Zoom earlier, you can see the annual, it's called the CAPER is the acronym, the Consolidated Annual
Performance Evaluation Report.
Yep. So that report that shows how and where we used all of our funds, I think at least 10 years worth of them is on the link that is higher up in the Zoom. We can, it's on our project website and you can review any of those anytime you like. Sorry, Mary Kay, did you have more to add?
I was just going to say, in addition to HUD coming, usually, lately they've been coming once or twice a year. In addition to that, the city is audited. And so typically our CDBG program is chosen by the auditors because it's such a big program. So we get looked at multiple different ways.
I'd also like to take the opportunity to shout out to Mary Kay because she is very diligent with record keeping and making sure that we all follow the rules very strictly that HUD provides. So we have a very strong internal auditor in Mary Kay.
Looks like we have a hand raised from Matthias Malise. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce your last name. I'm sorry. I'm going to allow you to talk and unmute you so you can ask your question.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's Matthias Lalise. So thank you so much for mentioning the Slight Caper report. You know, I've looked at those reports from a couple of previous years and had some concerns about sort of the priorities of the city with respect to affordable housing. And some of those concerns are reflected in my comments about the report today. So in the 2018 to 2019 CAPER report, for example, one thing that I found was that more was spent on, you know, literally mural art, and more was spent on the Genesee Valley Park than was spent on multi-unit housing. That's kind of shocking because renters are 60% of Rochester's population. And we know that we live in you know, a rent-burdened city. So a city that has a lot of renters, in a city where the renters pay, you know, a lot for rent annually. So housing and expanding the housing stock and improving the housing stock has to be the priority. So I've looked at the current budget proposal, the annual 2020 to 21 plan. And one of the interesting things that I would like you to justify is the following. We're spending $1 million of the CDBG funds on housing improvement. So that involves, you know, improving existing rental housing. And that's the same amount that was spent last year. Now, in this year's budget, we're also seeing a proposed $1 million of spending in DRIES, I guess it's a playground program. Again, about the same amount that was spent last year. Also this year, we're seeing an increase in the spending on demolishing of existing buildings. So it's 1.8 this year and an increase of $400,000. So 1.4 million last year, 1.8 million this year. So I would really like you to justify those priorities. So the fact, one, that we're spending the same amount on housing improvement as on playgrounds, and that we're spending nearly twice as much on demolition as we are on housing improvement. What's the rationale for that, and how can you explain the fact that it's a multi-year thing, that these are the priorities that the city has adopted for a large number of years?
Thanks, Matthias. Before our panelists answer that, I just want to note, I have posted in the chat function there the survey for comments. So if you would like to submit written comments, please remember to, in addition to asking them, in a forum like this, it's great to submit your comments into that form, just so we can have an extra written record of them. Thanks.
So I'll say just a little bit, and then maybe ask Carol Wheeler, who's the city's manager of housing, also to jump in. But one thing that can be a little, I don't know if confusing is the right word, but they're big documents. There's a lot of information in them. In this year's annual action plan, I think there's 27 different projects that are listed. So there's for issues like housing development and rehab and housing quality, affordable housing, there are a number of different projects in there. So I think you referenced the housing rehabilitation program, which is one of many projects that we have funded and are proposing to fund again this year to support affordable housing and quality housing development for low and moderate income families in the city. The Affordable Housing Fund is actually the largest project proposed in this year's annual action plan, which is, I think it was about $2.4 million. So you have to look at multiple projects, individual projects, to get to the totals for certain categories of investment. I'm not sure, I'll have to go back and look at the CAPER. It seems like, I don't know if there was just a reporting issue, or maybe sometimes with affordable housing development projects in particular, it takes a couple of years to get through the process. So there may be some years where fewer dollars are spent and others more than you might typically see if you were to look at it a line over time. But maybe I'll defer to Carol to jump in and talk a little bit, because there are many projects that we support around affordable housing and housing rehabilitation.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth, and I think you did a great job in explaining that there are different programs and there are different activities probably within each funding category. And when you mention the CAPER, what that actually measures is what are the units that are actually completed within that fiscal year. So sometimes what happens is that even though there may be other projects that are underway nearing completion, it may not be reflected in the CAPER because it is not fully completed and closed out in, say, the HUD system. However, as Elizabeth mentioned, we do have a large amount of dollars that's going directly to programs or projects. Now, the other thing that you mentioned was, gee, there is a small amount of dollars that's dealing with the rehab. And that is an existing program. We're talking about existing units that are probably in need of some type of rehab. And we do want to be able to do those type of investments as well. Now, when we look at, say, the funding for that, that is CDBG dollars. But as Elizabeth mentioned, there are other resources that are available, and the ones that really speak to the development of new units, those are the home dollars. And again, when we look at the CAPER, it may not reflect all the activity that's taken place because the CAPER is really relying upon just those that were completed within that fiscal year. But affordable housing is a very high priority for the administration, and we will continue to invest as much as we can for that particular effort.
So perhaps I could sharpen the question a little bit. So let's look specifically at, the demolition program. The demolition program calls for about $2 million of spending from CDBG. And the target of that program is to demolish 100 existing units. Now, with the Housing Improvement Fund, the listed target is 45 household units rehabilitated. That sort of project is a priority, it seems to me, for Rochester, given the fact that this is a city with approximately 13,000 currently unoccupied housing units, many of those rental units, meaning that we need to invest in improving those housing units to make them habitable so that people will eventually move into them. Okay, so that's $1 million housing improvement from CDBG in order to repair 45 housing units. If we took that money, the money that's being spent on demolition, which is approximately twice that amount, we're looking at 135 units that we could assist in contrast to 45, let's say. So I would like for you specifically to address how you came to the decision to spend $1.8 million on what in the language of the proposal, I think is somewhat callously referred to as blight reduction, which, as I indicated, should not be a priority of the city. The priority of the city should be to expand quality, affordable housing. And the best way to do that is to invest in repairing the ample housing that we have, those 13,000 currently unoccupied units. Why is it the case that we're spending twice as much on demolition as we are on housing improvement?
So I would just say again, the housing improvement, we would probably take a broader definition of that. I mean, the Affordable Housing Fund is $2.4 million to create very high quality, affordable rental housing. Housing rehab is just one category of housing project that's proposed for funding within this. I will just say, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this work is heavily prescripted by and regulated by HUD. And actually a lot of the terminology in these documents and the data sources are required and used by HUD. So I think to your point about the language around demolition and blight, I think a lot of people would share your frustration with that kind of language. But that's the language that HUD uses and that we use to receive HUD funds.
I just want to note again, thank you for those comments. And if anyone has comments.
Sorry, Andre, can I just say one other thing? It slipped my mind. I can hear that you're very passionate, which is great, to have a lot of ideas and passion about our communities. And there's a comment form. We're taking public comment on these documents and plans through May 24th on the project website. You can submit all your thoughts.
Can I also just mention?
And we are required to submit all those comments in our final documents to HUD.
Okay, may I just make one other comment about even just say demolition. Demolition sometimes helps to facilitate the development of new and affordable housing. We need the land in which to actually develop. And as a result of demolition, we have more access to available land for development to take place.
Got it. So Elizabeth, I was just going to say the same thing that you said, is which was, please remember, if you have great comments like this, in-depth information that you would like to provide to as she said, be attached and be submitted along with the report and along with the project to HUD. Please do fill out that survey that I posted in the chat link. We do have a couple other comments or a couple other questions. We have a question from Bruce Allen.
Can I just jump in here real quick? I just want to follow up on something that Dorian asked for.
Okay.
So we do have a map. I just learned that we have completed a map of where those business applications are being applied right now in the city, and we can post that map on the website. So we will do that on our the website that answers the same website where we're answering questions. We will post that map of where we're spending those dollars.
Great, thank you. We have a related question from Bruce Mellon, who's asking if we have one shot at making comments or questions, or can we submit multiple groups of comments? I'm just gonna go ahead and answer that. You can resubmit on the form. It's gonna ask you to put your name and zip code and a couple other things, so we'll know which comments come from which person. But you should be able to submit twice on that SurveyMonkey form. We also have another question, a couple of questions from Mary Coffey asking about rehabbing, saying if you can tell her where most of the homes that were rehabbed and how many homes were rehabbed. Specifically, she seems to be asking, does the housing belong to landlords or homeowners?
So I don't know off the top of my head all the addresses of homes where we've done housing rehabilitation. I think actually though that information would be available in last year's CAPER for projects that were completed last year. And to my understanding, our home housing rehab project that's funded through this process is for homeowners. That would be low or moderate income.
All right, it looks like Dorian is raising his hand. I'm gonna ask him real quick if he re-raised his hand or if I forgot to lower it from before. There we go.
I'm raising my hand.
Okay.
I am raising my hand. Yep, good. So one question, I noticed the 2034 plan was supported with CDBG funds. So one question is, do we know how much CDBG money is being used for planning? So for example, different salaries, different planning activities like the 2034 plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so planning is, oh, sorry.
Yep. So I guess just kind of want to understand money, how much of the dollars are being spent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so planning is a project. It's project number 24 in the annual action plan. There are $249,000 set aside for that proposed project, and that's for the city's planning staff. And we have just over $9.7 million in CDBG funds that we will be using next year. So that's about 2.6% of the CDBG funds are reserved for planning.
Can we also talk about the planning cap that's applied for HUD monies, Mary Kay?
Yes, so 20% of CDBG funds can be used for planning and administration. That includes like putting together the CAPER, drawing down funds, putting together the plans, anything like that. Monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 7.5% cap for emergency solutions, a 3% cap for us for HOPWA, and a 10% cap for home funds. So there's a limit to what we can set aside for those sort of activities.
Looks like we are getting close to our stop time. We don't have any open questions right now, so if you do have any open questions, please submit them so we can get into them. And also, if you at 5:59, if you remember something, remember we do still have the question form open on the project webpage. We have a little question here from Matthias again, asking if the plan is still in development. Oh, he's raising his hand. Here we go. Hi, Matthias.
Hello. Hi. So yeah, you can answer the question about the plan still being in development, but I just wanted to quickly respond, not to be repetitive on this point. I don't know who exactly it was who mentioned that the spending on demolition of homes opens up room for development. The strategy that we ought to be pursuing in Rochester, it seems to me, based on all of the evidence that I've seen, some of which I've cited, the fact, for example, that there are 13,000 currently unoccupied housing units in Rochester. What that tells me, and I would urge you to consider this in conceiving of the plan, investing in the existing housing stock is what we should be doing instead of demolishing existing properties, and that really has to be the priority of the city. It's to build on build on the housing stock that we already have, and I mean, I don't know if you would like to speak to this from more of a, this is kind of more of a general question. Again, it seems to me that on the basis of the evidence that I've seen, building more, okay, so building more is not the right strategy. What has to be done is the principal focus has to be on improving the existing housing stock. And so I don't know if you want to respond to that. I'm pressing you on this just because I think it is a very important point. So, perhaps you want to respond to it again. But just, I would urge you to consider in your, development of the plan going forward, whether or not we should be pursuing that strategy, pursuing the strategy of.
So I would say that your comment sounds more like a comment than a question, and I would encourage you to go to the comment form and submit that for consideration. I would probably just let you know that that we hear people with a very similar opinion to yours, and we also hear from folks who really want to see more demolition in their neighborhood because of the quality and the difficulties of how sort of negative impacts of abandoned property in their neighborhoods. And that's why, this is a public process. We want to hear from everyone and weigh those different interests and ideas in considering what will be included in the final plan. So you're right that the plan isn't finalized at this point. We're in our 30-day public display and comment period. So submit your comments. We'll be finalizing the plan pretty soon, within the next couple of weeks, and we're bringing it to council for formal action in June.
So
and part of that, the timing of this is that we need to have final documents that are submitted to HUD by no later than June 30th of this year, so that we can begin our work on July 1, which is the beginning of our next program year.
So I just want to squeeze 2 questions in this last minute here. The first one is from Bruce, asking if the cost of consultants like Highland Planning are part of that 20% cap. Is that I think that's a yes, right? All the consultants are part of that planning cap, or no? Yes.
The planning and admin.
Yep. And then the other question is Dorian asking, he said CDBG funds should support 30% AMI building projects. and he's only seen 80% AMI. Again, that does sound like a comment. Please do fill out that comment form. But does anyone want to comment on that?
I would just say one follow-up, and then maybe Carol will also chime in that I think Carol mentioned this before, that typically in terms of housing development, our home dollars are the source that we use for that, not CDBG.
That is correct. We usually use the home dollars for the development of housing, as well as really honing in on certain income levels. And what we are looking to do is definitely prioritize lower income households being able to access the rental housing developments that are being created. So 30%, as Elizabeth mentioned, those income levels or those income targets, we are doing it with home and not CDBG. CDBG usually is not for the creation or new construction of units, but it's only for typically rehab, and the majority of all of our CDBG dollars, when we're talking about rehab, are for existing owner occupants. Home, on the other hand, we are able to rehab as well as create new units, and the new units that we're hopeful to create will help those at that target population of less than 30% be able to access them.
Thanks. All right, so we have reached 6:01, so this is officially the end of our time. I want to note one more time before we go that I am going to post links to the question form and comment form both here in the chat field. So please grab those. You can also access those through the City of Rochester website. If you just go to cityofrochester.gov and you use the search field, you know, if you can't remember URLs, or you don't have time to click on things, or you're on your phone, if you go to the city website and you type in consolidated plan into the search field, you should be able to find the project page, and all the links you'll need should be there. Elizabeth, you want to wrap us up?
I'm going to jump in real quick, because I think if you put consolidated plan in the search field, it takes you to that list, the archive list of documents. You have to put in 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan that would take you to the website where the current documents are displayed and where you can pick up the survey comment form, correct?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Type in consolidated plan, it comes up with a list. The page for this project is the second item.
Okay, there you go.
Is the list of all the past projects and the CAPER documents that we mentioned and things like that. The second item for this project.
Very good. Okay,
Great.
well,
I would just say thank you.
Yeah,
And
thank
give
you.
it to Doreen to close this out.
yeah, thank you for participating tonight. I want to thank Elizabeth for her diligence in preparing these documents with our consultant and with our city team. And I appreciate, Elizabeth, all your attention to detail and getting this done. Thanks to all our panelists for participating tonight. And please submit your comments and questions online, and we'll follow up as promised. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm going to wrap this up, and we look forward to your questions and comments in the field, in the comment fields that we sent over. Thanks everyone.
Great. Thank you.